Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Removing Roadblocks to Getting Published. We're here today with Sarah Arthur. Sarah is a good friend, and she and I have collaborated on many different fronts. She's a
Yes.
fun-loving speaker and author of a dozen books, ranging from popular devotionals to serious engagement with literature. A 20-year publishing veteran with degrees from Wheaton College and Duke Divinity School, Sarah serves as preliminary fiction judge for the Christianity Today Book Awards. She also leads writing workshops at such events as Writing for Your Life, of course, the Frederick Buechner Writers Workshop, of course, the Festival of Faith and Writing, and the Art of Writing Conference, which is in conjunction with the Christie Awards. Her book, A Light So Lovely, The Spiritual Legacy of Madeleine L'Engle, author of A Wrinkle in Time, which was published by Zondervan, has positioned her as one of the leading authorities in the role of literature in Christian spiritual formation. So Sarah and I are just going to chat. I've got a number of things to ask her about various aspects of writing and getting published. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Glad we could still do this. I have kids home today on their third snow day in a row. So this is kind of miraculous.
Well, we're very glad.
That would be my number one roadblock to doing anything in this work is small people. Small
Really?
people.
Well, we're very glad you're surviving the cold and the kids. So
Right. Oh, yeah. Yep.
So in any event, as I mentioned, this whole series has been around removing roadblocks. And what were some of the major roadblocks you encountered, Sarah, when you first wanted to have books published? And what did you do to overcome them?
Right. Well, I had back in the 90s, I was a full-time youth director who had been an English major. So I was kind of this weird person in my role as a youth worker. And so initially, my first forays into publishing had to do with writing curriculum, youth ministry related curriculum. And I had just some weird open doors that happened with that. So like I would go to a conference and I'd meet the editor of Cokesbury, which was my denominational house, and she would just put out a call for anyone to touch base with her about curriculum stuff. And so I did. And so initially I had some open doors that I just went through. But my first love is literature and fiction. I was a snooty English major. I didn't want to be writing, like curriculum where you're giving people instructions about how to cut a piece of paper, to work with whatever particular activity you're describing. And yet I decided that those are really good reps for me. Like if I wanted to learn about the publishing process, I had to start in an area where first I was an expert, even if it wasn't my first love all the time. And secondly, I needed to learn how to meet deadlines. I needed to learn the lingo of the publishing world. I needed to learn how to communicate with editors and understand who the different editors are in the publishing world and the steps along the process. So I think if I hadn't taken those opportunities when they came up, I think that would have been a serious roadblock to me when I did pitch to more traditional publishing houses later. One of my roadblocks is that I lived way up in northern Michigan, nowhere near where a lot of publishing stuff happens, right? Nowhere near New York City, nowhere near Chicago and conferences or any of the big cities where those kinds of things happen. But somebody handed me a flyer or a brochure about attending what was, I think it's still around, the Right to Publish conference in the Chicago area. It's a much smaller venue now, I believe, than it was when I attended. But I looked at the flyer and it said, here are all these different publishing houses that are going to be there within Christian publishing. Here's the presenters, etc. I think you should go to this. And I, at that time, was still in full-time youth ministry, and I was going to be wrapping up my job in that later that summer. And so I was not, I could have said, well, I'm going to put this off until after I'm done with my youth ministry job and I've, moved on into other stuff, but I didn't. I was, 8 hours away from Chicago by car, but I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to somehow budget for it. I'm going to take vacation time to go. And I made sure that I was there. And those meetings with editors were the open doors that led to my very first book in 2003 called Walking with Frodo, a devotional journey through the Lord of the Rings, which was literature. It was youth ministry. It was everything that I loved and had become an expert in. But if I hadn't, I think that my budget and my vacation time and all of that could have been a roadblock if I had allowed it to be. But I've been doing curriculum, and now I was ready to take it to the next level. I think there were some divine appointments during that conference, that first conference, that if I hadn't been prepared could have also been roadblocks. So before I went to the conference, I learned a lot about who was coming and what kinds of things their publisher, the publishing company produced. I typed up writer business cards on my computer. I didn't even have professional business cards, but I knew that that was important so they could follow up with me. And sure enough, an editor did. So the kinds of things that might be typical roadblocks, at a certain stretch in my life, felt like I needed to just kind of blast through those. I didn't have a website, but I had my husband help me build one. So that when editors did follow up with me, I looked legit. So, my first correspondence with one of the editors from that conference led to that book with Tyndale that became a bestseller that same year. So, I had some really good success right out of the gate, but in part it was because I didn't let roadblocks be roadblocks to me.
So since that time, Sarah, you've published many different books, many different types of books with different publishing houses. How have you found the process of getting a book deal to vary depending upon the publisher or the genre?
Yeah, well, I've made lots of pitches that have gone nowhere. I would, instead of 12 books under my belt, I'd have like 30 or 40 if they were all accepted. And of course, they don't all get accepted. So in some ways, I have to be firing on multiple cylinders, right? It can't just be all youth ministry. It can't just all be literature. I have to be brainstorming other things all the time. And so when I pitch to a publisher, I am paying careful attention to the kinds of things they've published recently, to the kinds of, I'm asking editors, like, what are you looking for? If you could publish, so one question I ask an editor, and I do this at conferences all over the place. I asked it of Mickey Maudlin of Harper One at one point, sat down with him at the Frederick Buechner conference. And I said, if you could publish your dream project, what would it be? That's a great question, right? And he's like, that's a great question. And so when somebody says those things back to me, I'm immediately thinking, all right, what do I have? What could I put together? What is in my wheelhouse that might fit what that editor's just told me? And so a lot of it is just paying attention. I also pay attention to, have they had a good book recently, a bestseller? If they've had a bestseller recently, they're much less risk aversive, right? Especially if it's in a kind of category that I've published in before. So I'm constantly paying attention to that kind of thing. If I get a book from the library or that I hear about, what do I look at first? I immediately go to who published this book, right? This is a Zondervan book actually called The Read Aloud Family by Sarah Mackenzie, who does the Read Aloud Revival. I just got this book and immediately I was like, Zondervan, that's my publisher. So they're obviously interested in things about literature and reading and writing. And of course, they were the ones who did my Madeline L'Engle book.
So speaking of which, maybe you'd like to tell the story of how that book came about, how that relationship came about, since it involves writing for your life.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, never underestimate the power of any writing conference, but the Writing for Your Life conferences that you put together, Brian, are a particularly, I don't know, it's like this tribe of people that find each other. And when they find each other, it's like, you speak my mother tongue. It's amazing. So the Writing for Your Life conference that was hosted at Western Theological Seminary in Holland, not this past May, but the May before, and it's happening again this May, right?
Right.
But it hasn't been for 2 years, am I right? Or have you had it every year?
No, 2017 and then this year.
And then, okay. So, gosh, was it 2017?
Already.
Already. That was a while ago already, almost 2 years ago. So, I looked at who was coming in addition to me, and I was like, who have I not connected with yet? And I had not yet connected with Stephanie Smith at Zondervan. And I can't remember if it was me or her who reached out ahead of time, but I'm always probing ahead of time, like, hey, who's available to have lunch or dinner? Just to chat, like, to ask that question. If you could publish your dream project, what would it be? So Steffi and I set up lunch or dinner, I can't remember. And we just started brainstorming, and nothing like concrete came of that other than the commitment to keep in touch, right? Like, hey, something might come of this conversation. And sure enough, later that summer, she reached out to me and said, next year is going to be a big year for Madeline L'Engle. Wrinkle in Time's coming out. Zondervan wasn't aware, but I was aware that it was going to be Madeline's 100th birth year. And so, we had the opportunity to pull something together, and we had to go back and forth on the deadline, but once we landed on that and all the other details to make it work, that's how it came together. So, but I wouldn't have known Stephanie. I'm not sure she would have thought to reach out to me if it hadn't been for that. So yeah, Brian is kind of a matchmaker, just so y'all know. You've got to show up at Writing for Your Life conference. You never know where he's going to be like, oh, hey, have you met so-and-so? Because that's the, four of my books have come, of the 12, launched with a publisher I'd never worked with before because I met them at a writing conference.
There's no question that the power of networking is just so important.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And more and more. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So speaking of Madeline and walking on water, Sarah and I are working together to put together a Madeline L'Engle conference called Walking on Water.
I'm so excited.
This coming November. So, it's still pretty much a work in progress. So there's not a whole lot we can say about it yet. But Sarah, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Oh, I will always love to talk about it, and people can email me anytime with questions about it. Yeah, so I'm co-directing this with Brian and with the consultation of Charlotte Jones-Voigelis, who is Madeline's granddaughter and the president of Crosswicks Limited, which is her literary company. And so it will be held at All Angels Church in Manhattan in New York City. November 15th will be a pre-conference writing retreat, and November 16th, that Saturday, will be a full-day conference. So everything from keynotes to panel discussions to, hey, go off on a lunchtime and hang out with other people who are really interested, not just in Madeline L'Engle. We want this to be a conversation about spirituality and the arts in general. So conversations about spirituality and music, about visual arts. All Angels is a really big into the arts in all different categories, and so they're gonna be a great host venue for that. And of course, it's New York City, so access to a lot of other things, museums and parks and concerts and all kinds of wonderfulness that weekend. So we can't wait. We can't wait. There's more information at MadelineL'Engle.com. We are going to hopefully have a host website at some point, but I'm the co-director, so you can email me at conference@MadelineL'Engle.com for questions, and we hope to be posting registration and other stuff, information soon once we start to nail down details. But it's going to be a small venue, so you want to sign up sooner rather than later, or we may run out of spots. Yay!
No, it's very exciting. Very exciting.
It is. And we can't wait to announce our keynotes and stuff. Oh my goodness.
It's really going to be an outstanding group of folks that are going to be there. So.
Oh yeah.
So before we leave,
I'm beaming.
Before we leave the topic of Madeline, you've also done a Madeline L'Engle podcast. Do you want to touch on that for a moment?
Yeah, well, this is something new. I mean, 10 years ago, if you were an author, they would have told you to maintain a blog, right? And some authors still do, and, send out a newsletter, which is still a very powerful way to connect with readers and stuff, and to let publishers know that you're serious. But a podcast is also an emerging form where more and more people are listening to those on their commutes. And so the podcast that I did was we just called it a one-season podcast. We may pick up another season of it eventually, but because I did, for A Light So Lovely, the Madeline book, I did a ton of interviews with people who knew her or who had been inspired by her and were now influencers. So Sarah Bessey, Jeffrey Overstreet, Sarah Czar, Nikki Grimes, Makoto Fujimura. I interviewed Philip Yancey, Lucy Shaw, Barbara Braver, who was Madeline's longtime roommate or housemate. And so all of that content was really important to maintain, to hang on to, but I couldn't include it all in the book. So the podcast became a place where people could kind of see behind the scenes how I interviewed the people and what kinds of things they had to say that didn't end up in the book. So that was great.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and you can find it on Podbean. It's just called the Madeline Podcast. It's about 6 episodes right now.
So are there any new book projects that you can tell us about that you're working on?
Ooh, I always have irons in the fire. That never goes away. So, yes, I, for years, have been working on fiction, writing young adult fiction, and I finally have a novel that's being considered by a publisher. I can't really say a whole lot more than that, other than it's YA and in the spirit of, Madeline L'Engle and Tolkien and Lewis. So, hopefully I'll have more information by the Madeline Conference. That would be fun this fall. And then I also, ongoing ideas with various publishers as follow-ups to books that I've already done. And because I've published with 5 publishers right now, that's a lot of conversations, right? Always looking for ways to follow up, because one of the things, it's not always about having a bestseller out of the gate. A lot of times publishers are looking to enliven their backlist, and a new title by one of the authors they've already worked with is one of the ways they do that.
So people may not be aware of the different devotionals that you've done that really touch on some of the great writers, great literature in different areas. Do you want to tell folks about those for a moment?
Sure. So Paraclete Press is one of the publishers I've worked with, and they have a particular niche of looking at literature. So they've done some great fiction. So Can You See Anything Now is a Christianity Today award-winning novel by Catherine James. They did that novel. They've published lots of poets, Lucy Shaw, Scott Cairns. The list goes on. So I had an idea years ago of a kind of guide to prayer where the excerpts that you read are not from devotional literature or from nonfiction, spiritual writing, but from fiction and poetry from throughout the centuries. I had this idea probably 15 years ago. I pitched it somewhere. It didn't go anywhere. But then Paraclete reached out to me after I graduated from Duke, and they were like, hey, what are some things we might do with you? And I pitched this idea to them in part because I knew that I would be able to have access to their poets. and that would allow me to reprint materials without a big reprint fee every time. So I pitched the idea to Paraclete, and that launched the Literary Guides to Prayer series, in which I would have to get permission rights from dozens of publishing companies all over the place, the big New York houses and stuff, and that I learned a lot from. And I pitched to the Buechner Center to reprint excerpts from some of Buechner's books, and they very graciously allowed me to do that. So the 3 books in that series are called At the Still Point, which is a literary guide to prayer for ordinary time, the season that runs through the summer and fall, and Light Upon Light, which is for Christmas and Advent, Christmas and Epiphany, and also Between Midnight and Dawn for Lent, Easter, and leading up to Pentecost. So that takes us through the whole year. And the readings, I've gotten to know some of the most amazing poets who have pointed me to poets from the 3rd century, it's the readings are so rich, and I got to be the curator, pairing them together thematically. It's just been a tremendous. So yeah, so the next one that would be relevant to folks for Lent is Between Midnight and Dawn.
Those are just really wonderful books. So that's why I wanted to, touch on those here because I just think that you did such a wonderful job with those. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. Well, the people I got to work with, and poets are so happy to share their work with the world and to see them in an anthology with some of the classics like Dostoevsky and Donne and Christina Rossetti. I mean, it makes a contemporary poet go, oh my gosh, there's my poem. Just so much talent and beautiful, beautiful work.
So you touched on Frederick Buechner, and for those of
Mm-hmm.
you that don't know, I served as the director of the Frederick Buechner Center for several years. And Sarah and I worked together at the very first Buechner Writers Conference at Princeton Seminary. And
It was the first. Yeah.
yeah, 2015,
Yeah.
believe it or not.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So,
Wow.
and Sarah mentioned that she's, used many of Mr. Buechner's excerpts in some of her books. You want to talk just a little bit, Sarah, about what his books have meant to you?
Oh, absolutely. I came to Buechner through his nonfiction rather than his fiction. No. Hold up. I think I was assigned all the Bebb books, his fiction, some of his fiction, when I was a senior in college. So ignore what I just said. And those, I think my senior lit class was on the Fool in literature, and of course the character of Bebb is just this enigmatic character. But what really struck me about Buechner along the way, and reading some of his nonfiction too, was he was hitting on all the points that that connected with my life. He was writing fiction. He was writing nonfiction. He was a pastor, so a lot of his talks and speaking has been published. My dad's a Presbyterian pastor, so he's firing on all of these cylinders, and to me that spoke to overcoming roadblocks in publishing, right? Because a lot of times the publishing world wants to peg you in a certain category. You're a novelist. You're a nonfiction memoirist. You're you write how-to books, like that's what you do and that's your only platform. And I think Buechner, he just blew through all of those categories, and the same with Madeline L'Engle. And they were not just published in Christian publishing, despite the fact that they were spiritual writers. They were published with HarperCollins, with Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. I mean, these were major New York houses. And all along the way, both of those authors have been a powerful example to me of overcoming those kinds of limitations by not locking yourself in. Yes, when you have a project, go after it, set yourself up as the expert for that piece, whatever it is, but don't lock yourself in. And yeah, both of those authors have been key for me.
So we mentioned a few moments ago that Sarah's going to be speaking at another Writing for Your Life conference coming up in her neck of the woods in Holland, Michigan, this coming May 20th.
Where it's currently like -30 wind chill, by the way.
Right. So by May, we hopefully will have a little bit better weather.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's May 20th through 23rd, 2019 at Western Theological Seminary there in Holland. And Sarah, can you talk a little bit about what you plan to present there?
Yes, if I can remember. Do you remember what I'm...
Yeah.
Am I talking about how to write like Madeline L'Engle? Is that my... I think that might be my talk. No. Oh, no. It's on... no, it's sorry.
So here...
I do this a lot. I'm going to be speaking from as my position as this Christianity Today judge for the book awards. I'm going to be speaking about how to write like... how to write like the masters of the craft, like how to write in a way that'll outlast you. Right,
that's the title. How to write books that outlast you.
I knew it was up there somewhere. I knew it. 3 snow days in a row with a 5-year-old and 8-year-old. Woo! Yes. So how to write books that outlast you. So how to take the long view, how to not just try to hit the cultural moment or whatever's trending and buzzing right now, but to think in terms of this being your legacy. What am I leaving behind? And then I'm going to look through the sort of rubrics that I use as the Christianity Today fiction judge the preliminary fiction judge, for the kinds of books I'm looking for and the kinds of things those books are doing. If you're curious about that, I wrote about it in an article for CT called "I'm on the Lookout for the Next Great Christian Novel." I didn't give it that title, but that's what CT gave it. So if you want to know what my rubrics are and my reasoning behind that, you can go to that article. I am on the lookout for the next great Christian novel. And that'll give you a sense of how I'm going to be developing that talk in a unique way for Writing for Your Life. And I hope you all can make it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So let's talk about a totally different topic for a moment. You're pretty active on social media, and we all know that that's an important place for authors to be.
Yeah.
But it's not easy, right? From a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what your approach is and kind of what your overall social media strategy is?
Oh gosh, I wish I had a coherent one. That'd be nice though. Brian is your go-to person for that kind of thing. Well, some of it is that I try not to make a lot of extra work for myself. So if I post on Instagram, I want it to also go to Facebook. So that's one of the ways that I do that. I used to be able to post to Facebook and it would go to Twitter, but that doesn't happen now. I'm trying to do original content on my author page on Facebook as well, because that tends to get more traction in the algorithms for whatever reason. But I also set limits for myself, because otherwise I could be on my phone all day, every day. And one of those limits is my phone goes to sleep at 9 p.m. Even if I don't, my phone goes to sleep at 9 p.m. because I need to give myself the mental break from my phone. I'm not on it on Sundays if I can help it, unless a big article or something has just posted. But when there is traction on anything, and I've got a lot of readers and folks responding, I am quick to respond to them if I can with an actual comment, because the more I do that, the more those social media platforms pick up on the fact that I'm interacting with fans, and the more that post shows up in people's feeds, because it's more and more and more popular. So just learning little tricks like that. I tag everybody I can all the time, especially people that I know are active on social media that are going to repost stuff and retweet stuff. So those are some of the ways that I maximize my time on social media without getting sucked into just that being my life. I guess that's it. I mean, I don't know a lot of the tricks. I don't really know how to create graphics and memes and things. I need to learn how to do that. I'm still a newbie to Instagram, and so I need to have somebody who's a pro sit down with me and show me how to repost things and ways. I don't know. There's a lot I need to learn. But I also, every once in a while, if I'm nearing a benchmark, hey, I have 1,500 followers on Twitter. I'd like to have 2,000. Share this so people will follow me and learn more updates. If they're Madeleine L'Engle fans, they don't want to miss out. And sometimes my friends help me out to reach those benchmarks, and that's fun. But that's it. It's so not impressive. Sorry.
No, I think it's really helpful for people, who are earlier in their careers than you are, and, more just getting started to hear, that you don't necessarily have it all figured out.
Oh, yeah.
And that
it's a constantly changing medium too. I mean, back in the day when everyone said I should be blogging, I really panicked about that because I just didn't have the bandwidth to be blogging all the time. And so I would blog periodically, but not anything like the real power bloggers that are making money off their blogs. And now that's not, not a lot of people are reading blogs as much. And so I've done the occasional podcast, but I haven't broken my back doing that because in 5 years, it's going to be something else, right? And so you make the whole list of things that authors are told they should be doing, and maybe it's 25 things, and pick 7 of them that you can handle and that you're going to be really good at, and you get really, 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 you just zero in on those and maximize those. And if you could pick up a new one every couple of years, great, but otherwise, you're a writer. That's what you do. So that's the craft that you need to be honing first.
I think that's such good advice. Prioritize and focus.
Oh, yeah. Oh, because you could just, I mean, you could be crying every night that you didn't get your 25 items checked off the list. And it's not humanly possible unless you arrive at a certain level where you have a helper. So, yeah. Or you have a 21-year-old in your family who's like, that's their Christmas gift to you is to handle your social media engagement.
We could all use that, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, Sarah, I know you have some young children home from school because of the
I
weather
do.
out there, so I don't want to keep you too long, but is there anything else that you want to touch on while we're together?
No, I just can't stress enough the power of those conferences for networking. Um, people spend hundreds of dollars on golfing outings for their hobby, but if you are taking writing seriously as a calling, as a vocation, it is absolutely okay to prioritize whatever cost it is for you to attend those kinds of events. Ask for them for Christmas and your birthday and every other gift for the year. Have your family team up to give those to you, to send you, see if you can stay somewhere for cheap, whatever it takes for you to get there. I can't stress that enough. At the very least, you're going to interact with people who speak your language of writing and the spiritual life. And at the most, you'll have the opportunity to connect with people in the industry and begin that networking. It's huge.
Well, Sarah, thanks again for joining us. Best wishes
Absolutely.
with, everything, especially the weather at the
Sure.
moment out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's sunshine right now, but you don't want to step foot outside. It's so cold and windy.
So we'll look forward to seeing Sarah at the conference in Holland. And
Yep.
thank you all for joining us. We've got another webinar this afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with Sharon Koenig. So please join us then.
Great.
Bye now,
Take
everyone.
care, everybody. Thank you. Bye, Brian.